Thank you so much. I always have to joke that whenever somebody leads with who my dad is, people will say, "No, was Jack your dad?" And I'll say, "Well, it depends. Did he make you mad or did he not?" No, but thank you for that. So, as was so eloquently laid out, I've spent my life in the classroom and on the basketball court around Kentucky. It's been a passion of mine. It's what most of us would refer to as a calling. And it's shaped my life in more ways than I can count. And I'd like to tell you about one particular way. I know we're going to talk about policy and politics and all that kind of stuff. But I think the value in public education is the personal relationships and the impact that we have on kids' lives. That's why we do what we do. And so while a lot of the things that go on these days get politicized, I think it's really important to remember why we're in education and what all of us should be working for, and that's the next generation of Kentuckians. So I'm going to tell you about a really important one who has changed my life as much as any other experience I've ever had. It was about 7 years ago now. I had a young lady walk into my classroom. She was a freshman. I had no idea who she was. And she asked me for a basketball schedule. She wanted to be on the team. And so I gave her one. She went on her way. And I did not think another thing about it until my phone rang a couple weeks later. And it was this young lady, and her name's Emma. And Emma says, "Coach, I don't have anywhere to go." Blew my mind. So what do you mean you don't have anywhere to go? She went on to explain to me that she had basically bounced from house to house her entire life. Was having to find another place to go, did not want to go back to her biological mother's place because her biological mother had drug problems. And she didn't really know her dad. And so I said, "Okay, sit tight, we're on our way." So my husband, Chris, and I got in the car, and we headed that way. And as I'm putting on my seatbelt, I look at my husband and I say, "Now you know what's about to happen, right?" And he did, because he's also a basketball coach. That's how we met. I coached the girls' team and he coached the boys' team. And I promise, as cute as that sounds, it's not. That's just how we met. But what I can tell you is, long story short, within an hour, Emma was in the back seat of our car with one bag of clothes, and none of us knew what was going to happen. Did not take me very long to realize that she had a 1.2 GPA, and she read on a third grade level as a freshman in high school. So the challenges we were about to face, academically, athletically, socially, all of the above, were bigger than I ever could have imagined. And I'm going to be honest with you, the first 2 years were really hard. I mean really hard. With a child who has that kind of a story, you can imagine there wasn't a lot of discipline and accountability. And then that child moved in with 2 basketball coaches. So you know heads were going to roll, right? But I will tell you this. After a couple of years, I saw Emma start to turn the corner. And I saw her start to become the young woman that I thought she could be. Because as educators, we so often see in kids what others don't. Those tough exteriors that they have, we know it's no fault of their own. Those are the cards they've been dealt. And I'll be very honest with you, Emma was dealt a pretty darn bad hand. But the good news is that within 4 years, Emma became the first person in her biological family to graduate from high school. She tripled her GPA, which means she graduated with honors, and she doubled her ACT score. That's unheard of to me. Not to mention that because of all of those academic accomplishments, she got to stay on the basketball floor, because you have to do that first. She shattered every single boys and girls record in school history in basketball. And because of all of those accomplishments and all of the hard work that she put in, I got to sit beside her the day that she signed her Division I basketball scholarship to play at Texas A&M at Corpus Christi, which is where she is today. And if she were here today, she would tell you that her evolution is no coincidence. Because I think about the young lady that walked into my door 7 years ago, and I look at the woman I see before me now, and it's not the same person. It's just not. That child that walked through my door was doomed to repeat the cycles of poverty and addiction and joblessness. And the worst part of the whole thing was that she lacked the education that would empower her to break all of those cycles. And the woman that stands before me now is a senior in college. She's on the dean's list. She's the most valuable player on her basketball team last season. And when she graduates, she's going to be a nurse. She even has the opportunity, when she graduates, to potentially go overseas and play professional basketball. And if she were here today, she would tell you that she is who she is today because of her teachers. Those of us in education know you don't walk into high school reading on a third grade level and somebody waves a magic wand and all of a sudden you can double your ACT score. We wish it was that easy, but it certainly is not. And the lack of literacy that she had in her background, I knew as an educator, was going to negatively impact every single subject area and hinder her across the board academically until she was able to work on that enough to get that under wraps. And she would tell you the reason that she is where she is today because of her teachers. They did not, she didn't just walk into school and graduate. They came in early and worked with her before school. They stayed after school and worked with her. They came to her ball games and encouraged her, and it was the first time in this child's life that she felt like people invested in her. And that's what we do. And that has a big, big reason to do with why I'm in this race. Because there are Emmas in every school building across this Commonwealth. I wish I could tell you this is an unusual story, but you all know it's not. They're everywhere. And our job as educators and as a community is to lift these kids up. And the best, most efficient, most effective way to do that is through education, because we can empower them to break the cycles that they are in and to make a better life for themselves. So you can imagine hearing the rhetoric that's been coming out of this governor's office in the last 3 years has hit me particularly hard. Because the people who are my village, the village that helped us raise Emma, the village that helps raise every Emma across this Commonwealth, have been called thugs and ignorant people and drowning victims that need to be knocked out and dragged ashore. That's not who they are. That's not what they do, and that's certainly not what they need. Being in this race has allowed me to elevate the conversation around public education, and so many people will say to me, how did you go from being a high school teacher to being a lieutenant governor candidate? And that's a valid question. But the message I carry with me to folks who are not in the world of education is that every challenge we face in Kentucky, we face in our classrooms. The people are just smaller. When we talk about fighting for good health care, we know what happens to a kid that comes to school with inadequate health care. We talk about fighting the opioid epidemic. As an assistant principal, my job is discipline for juniors and seniors. So anybody who thinks I'm not ready for Frankfurt has another thing coming. But I can tell you I'm certainly concerned about a generation of kids that we are at risk of having fall victim to the opioid epidemic, and I also know we have a generation of kids who are being raised by their grandparents. So who better to identify the kids and the families who are most in need than the teacher who looks them in the eye every day? And when we talk about fully funding public education, that's something that gets thrown around a lot, and there's a lot of, again, politics that get thrown into that. But I'll tell you that when we're cutting adults from our buildings every year, I had to cut 10 as an assistant principal. And the number of kids go up. We're manufacturing class size issues, academic issues, and worst of all, school safety issues. And that's what the public doesn't really understand. When our instructional resource funds disappear, when professional development funds disappear, when transportation funds dwindle, the people that we're hurting are the kids in the seats in our classrooms. And that is what we mean when we say fully funding public education. It is so much more than content. It is so much more than instruction. It is truly investing in and caring for and lifting up kids, and that doesn't stop when the last bell rings. It never has, and it never will. And the investment we have to make in wraparound services that support not just kids outside of school, but families in our communities are vital. They're vital because not every Emma can play basketball and find a basketball coach who was crazy enough to take her in when she was a mess as a freshman in high school, right? And here's the message that I carry with me, probably more than anything else, is that the future of Kentucky's economy is in our classrooms today. So often, schools and public education get shortchanged as something that happens in a vacuum, and it's isolated from everything else, and it's just one issue. But I'll tell you this, I don't think this entire race is about public education. I don't think everything is about public education. But what I will tell you is you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find a challenge that we face in this Commonwealth where public education is not the solution. And that's why we have to commit to build a world-class public education system right here in Kentucky. For those of you who've been around the education movement for a long time, you've seen the gains Kentucky made after the Rose decision and after the CARA reforms that went on years ago. And we were kind of falling stagnant. And the last time we had an educator in the executive branch was Martha Lane Collins. It's been my lifetime since we've had someone who can speak to what it's like in the classroom and how to lift up an entire generation of kids, because that's what all of us should be doing in public service anyway. And when I look at those kids in the eyes and I understand what they go through at home and what their family lives are like, it drives me even more because it makes me realize our work will never be done. We can always be better in public education, but I'm not sure any of us would rest on the idea that we're ever good enough. Because there's always one more child we can reach. There's always one more thing we can do to help a kid. And we all know that the best way to do that is through public education. And so I kind of covered a lot of different bases there, but I know you want me to take some questions too, and I'm happy to do that. But I just hope you understand that we need allies in government, not adversaries, for public education. People who respect it, who respect the people who are in it, and who understand that we must leverage and support public education if we expect to leverage and support any other area of this Commonwealth. Thank you. Yes, so that's a great question. I know I'm actually learning a lot more about that. For those of you who don't know, my husband and I, about midway through this campaign, found out we were welcoming the newest member of the Jacqueline Coleman team in February. So, yeah, thank you. And so workforce participation rates are important, and especially for the women in Kentucky, because exactly what you said is true. Childcare is it's sparse and it's expensive, and we have to make sure that we are investing in areas that will help propel women, especially because childcare usually falls on the women, into positions and not completely take them out of the workforce if that's not what they want. Some women want that, some women don't. But it comes down to making sure that efforts like this are a priority. Everyone will say anytime you come up with a new proposal, well, where are you going to get the money for that? Well, I can tell you, you can find the money for anything that you prioritize. And so I would add on to that I fully believe that universal pre-K is going to be instrumental in helping to solve that issue as well. Most Kentuckians, as I'm sure many of you know, don't even realize that we don't have full day kindergarten, let alone universal pre-K for kids who fall behind. With the third grade literacy rates, basically setting the tone for the rest of a child's education and his or her life. I think the earlier that we can get students into organized educational settings, especially kids in areas of need who may not have access to preschool the way that more affluent families do, the better off we're going to be. Right. And so what I'll say first is most people know I am the only teacher in this race. I am also the only college student in this race. I'm a student at the University of Kentucky working on my doctorate in educational leadership right now, and so I do feel the pinch when those issues arise. And I will say that when we talk about post-secondary education, that is a broad tent that means lots of different things to lots of different people. I know in the secondary world, we have worked really hard to build and create pathways for students. And Andy and I are committed actually to even taking that farther down into the middle school years, so that we can make sure that kids have they have access and they have opportunity, and they're exposed to many different trades that they may or may not know have existed before. And so I think exposure is key. The second thing I would tell you is, whether it's teachers or adults in general, our job is not to tell students what they should do after high school. Our job is to ask them what they're interested in and create every opportunity we can for them to walk that path. So this whole, college isn't worth it, or you can't do anything unless you go to college, or you need to go to technical school, or, these things aren't worth it, enter the trades. That's not for us to say. Our job is to create opportunities and help shepherd these kids, these students, through those pathways, so that we can help to make sure that they are prepared for when they walk across that stage. I will say, when it comes to college affordability, that's a huge issue. It is a huge issue in Kentucky, and it is an obstacle, I would say. I know one thing that I have experienced I can speak personally to my students, counseling them as they graduate high school and decide what the next step is. So many of our students are pursuing our community college system in Kentucky as a starter. And while that's a great money-saving opportunity, it also is a nice kind of segue, maybe for some students who come from small towns in rural Kentucky like I did, before they jump into a giant university that maybe they've not experienced before. And so I know that that's something that can help as well. I would also say that we lag behind, and we can do better, and we must do better with apprenticeships in Kentucky, and ensuring that we have students who, once they enter the trades, they have the apprenticeships that will ensure that they are not only prepared and qualified, but that they can continue their education throughout their career. I'll tell you this, my principal, when I was an assistant principal, her husband entered the field, and he had his own HVAC business. He had built it by himself. He made way more money than she did. I'll just tell you that. And so anybody who looks down on any field or any trade in post-secondary is wrong. And I think everybody has their own unique path, and our job is to help them find that. So in helping them find that, we also have to work to make sure that it's more affordable. One of the things that Andy and I have released as part of our teacher pay plan was to help provide funds for student loan reimbursement, repayment for teachers in the field, as well as helping to secure funds for continuing education. We all know the master's requirement is no longer a requirement in Kentucky, but we can also look at investing into national board certifications that improves teaching and learning and instruction as well. And so there's lots of ways that we can do that. There's lots of ways that we have to be better than what we're doing right now. And like I said, our job is to help create opportunity. And so at every bend that we can do that, that's what we need to be doing. Thank you. So I will tell you this, and this is not an exaggeration, but as I have traveled the state, I have met more young people than I care to admit who have said to me, well, I was going to be a teacher, but I changed my major because of the way public education is in Kentucky right now. And that breaks my heart because, like you said, I view teaching as a calling. I didn't go into it to get rich. If I did, I'd be very disappointed. But I also think that we have to create a culture in Kentucky that doesn't exploit our calling. And what that means is you'll often hear, oh, teachers don't go into education to get rich. They're not concerned about the pay, right? Or one I heard in the last session was, well, with the sick days, not letting the sick days roll over if they're not used. Well, if teachers care so much about their kids, then why won't they just show up to work and not take all 10 days if they don't roll over? And I just said to that gentleman, if you were a doctor or a lawyer and you left money on the table, you'd lose your job. And so you don't get to exploit the fact that we love our job and love our kids and then expect us to expect less in return. And so that's just a personal note. Sorry. But with our teacher pay plan specifically, that we have to address the shortage. The shortage is real. It's happening. Not only do we have a shortage of teachers in the profession currently, but the number of students enrolling in teacher prep programs at the college and university level is going down. That should not surprise anybody in this room, given the climate in Kentucky and the climate nationally. Really, there's been a huge movement nationally. And so first, as simple as it sounds, what I would simply say is we have to restore a culture of respect for public education in Kentucky. Right now, I know that teachers don't feel respected, not just professionally, but personally. We have created a system where we ask more and more of teachers every year as they get less and less. And our response is, oh, well, you're just going to have to figure it out. You're just going to have to be innovative. At the same time that they're not seeing any sort of pay increase or any sort of advanced opportunity. And we can't be surprised when those things happen and people say, well, I can teach high school chemistry, or I can take this chemistry degree and go somewhere else and do something where I make a lot more money. And I hate to hear that because, like I said, this is a calling. So fully respecting public education is absolutely required, and I can promise you this, Andy and I will certainly restore that. He believes in it so much he picked a public school teacher to run with him. I think that's putting your money where your mouth is. But also, we have to work to increase the pay. And it's not just about pay, but it certainly is something that we can begin to do. We have to value continuing education. So many school districts, as I'm sure you know, are working on creating their own system of, sometimes they call it micro-credentialing instead of like a master's degree. There's the National Board Certification that is a super hard process, but man, you talk about creating some amazing instructional practices with teachers. And so investing in all of these areas are absolutely critical. And like I said, agreeing to build a world-class public education system in Kentucky is not just about the kids in the classroom today, it's about the future of our economy. And I like to say teachers are the original job creators. Yeah.
So I know we have to get Jacqueline off to Versailles. She has another event tonight, but we probably have time for one more question.
Okay.
There's one more out there.
So this is kind of sort of in the same vein of teacher shortages, but we are currently in the midst of a school counselor crisis.
Oh gosh, yes.
There are numerous studies showing that there is increasing prevalence of mental illness among kids in my age group and kids younger than me. But currently in the state of Kentucky, we are averaging about 400 students to one counselor, and in some elementary schools, this number gets as high as 800. So what would a Coleman-Prichard administration do to address this school counselor crisis?
Yes, thank you so much for asking that question. And let me just say that the work that you all do with your student voice team is, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Yeah. Every time I'm at a meeting or a conference and the student voice team is there, I'm like, everybody's going to listen. Everybody's going to listen. Yeah. So let me just kind of build on that. One of the things that we have, I think several schools are moving towards this now. We're not getting there fast enough, but we need to move a little. We need to move a little quicker. Is establishing maybe I called it a student leadership team. Is what we called it in our school, where we had students who were part of the governance of our school, and they had input. And when we wanted to create a new a new idea, a new practice, we had students in the room to ask questions to and to listen to, not just adults. And so when it comes to, especially with you talking about the uptick in mental illness, especially among teens these days, I think the first and foremost, students have to, we ask students all the time to buy in, right? To take ownership of your education. that you often have no say in. And so we can't have it both ways. And so the first thing I would say is we must elevate student voices so that you have the opportunity within your school and your school system to speak up about the things that you know impact your friends and peers that are your age. But most certainly, our school counselors are, first of all, they're not counselors. They are doing, they're the building assessment coordinators. They are the ones that are bringing the colleges in for college visits. They are ordering caps and gowns. They're organizing graduation. They're doing all of these things, and more testing keeps going on to the point where so often they don't get to do what they actually went to school to do and want to do, which is to help counsel kids. And the fact of the matter is, in my school, our guidance counselors were 400 to 1. I don't know how you do that anyway, but I certainly don't know how you do that with everything else on your plate. It's just impossible. And this is such a huge issue moving forward, not just for the sake of our students, but this has a school safety component to it. It has to be that we're willing to invest in every area of a child's life, because it is no longer just about you learning your multiplication tables. The days of that being education are long gone. This is about truly building relationships with students and being there for them, because that may be the only place that they have support. And we have to invest in areas like guidance counseling to make sure that not only do we bring the numbers down, I think that's the first thing, is we've got to work to bring those numbers down. But we also have to work to ensure that the guidance counselors are actually doing guidance counseling and not all of the testing and paperwork and things that have kind of fallen into their laps. And this comes back to fully funding public education. If I'm tasked with cutting 10 adults in our building in 1 year and the number of students didn't change, then our classes are getting bigger, adults in the hallway for supervision is less. And again, we manufacture school safety issues. And so there are so many things that go into this, but it genuinely comes back to we have to invest in what we value. We have to prioritize what we value. That's what a budget is. It's a blueprint of your priorities. I most certainly would prioritize ensuring that we can bring down the ratio of student to guidance counselors, and also work to reestablish guidance counselors in what they were intended to be. Because I think any guidance counselor right now would tell you that they are not doing what they set out to do or what they love to do. And that's part of why we get into this, is to be able to do those things. And so I appreciate that question, and I think that is absolutely going to be a focus moving forward. And I would love to have the student voice team talk to us a little bit more about how we can do that in our schools and what you are experiencing as you go through school.